Courage and honor, cousin.
Into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war.
Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zeckthar,
And I'm Yuksen.
and we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this month we'll be explaining the 40k universe for people who are new to it, maybe like yourself. Haha.
That's right, Zeckthar, and this week we'll be going through the timeline of the 40k universe, as calmly and safely as possible. But remember, if you guys like these retellings of 40k lore, you can support our channel by becoming a member on our YouTube channel, and more recently, you can purchase my brother's book, The Jotunise. Just click on the hyperlink or type in the title in the description wherever you get your books. I can't wait to get my hands on the paperback when it comes out.
Indeed, but for those of you who wish to read it on the cheap, go ahead and click on one of the hyperlinks, or just type in the Jotunise anywhere you buy a book. The ebook is selling for just $5.99 right now. But let us start this interesting month, shall we, Yuksen?
Absolutely. Now, the concept for this month's Voxes was established by one of our newer members, the Ladder Lord himself, Colin. He is fairly new to the lore of 40k and just didn't really know where to start.
Indeed. So we figured that we would do a simple or dummies guide to 40k.
Quite right, Zeckthar. And to do that, we have to go back to the beginning.
No, Yuksen. We have to go back to before the beginning.
But before we do, go ahead and subscribe. And remember, if you got any friends who are looking to get into Warhammer 40k and just don't know where to start, like Colin, send them this Vox.
Yes. Well, in the beginning was nothing but the empty void of space, until something unfathomable happened. An explosion of immense proportions erupted in the darkness, causing stars and planets to erupt from the inky black nothingness. At the start of the Milky Way, three major entities came into existence. The first and most notable were the Catan, galactic parasites that fed on the energy of stars, slowly devouring their power and then leaving it an empty void. These star vampires would then continue on, moving towards the next hapless star. Second was a transdimensional rip in time and space, which led to an alternate dimension. Some call it the Mouth of Insanity, others call it the Rift, but it is known to all as the Warp. And thirdly, and this is where our story begins, on some of the husk-like planets life began. Through millions of years, they slowly began to evolve into what is known as the Old Ones, the very first of sentient life in this new Milky Way, some would say. They craved knowledge, and soon their understanding of technology led them to create the Webway. Now, the Webway is a system of tunnels through the warp that allowed them to travel throughout the massive star systems at an alarming rate. After the completion of the Webway, they began to visit the worlds that could inhabit life, and then they began to create life on these planets. Things seemed to be going fine for the Old Ones. That is, until they reached the Halo star systems, and ran into a rather grumpy race known as the Necrontyr. It's funny and strange to me, Yuksen, that most life forms in the Milky Way system think this is the beginning, and don't think of the before. The place where we come from. Why, if it wasn't for Umkulu, this small universe wouldn't even exist.
Right you are, Zeckthar. If it wasn't for our Holy Father, Umkulu, none of this would exist. But should we really be writing this down? He that is greatest wishes only his servants to know of his existence. Only those that completed the trials of their system.
Indeed, Yuksen. Let us not speak of him again. But, like I said, the Old Ones eventually ran into the grumps of the galaxy. Yet, it wasn't entirely their fault. You see, the Necrontyr were born under a fearsome, scourging star. Their evolution pushed forth with atomic winds and plasma storms. Undoubtedly, under these conditions, they didn't have very long lifespans. They became a morbid and mercurial folk, who, despite their scientific advances, couldn't conquer the curse that was encoded in their bodies. Out of desperation, they reached out blindly into space, utilizing stasis crypts and slow-burning torch ships. Clad in living metal to resist the age-long journeys, they slowly started to colonize other planets. During this slow expansion, they came across the Old Ones, who not only had a much swifter and easier time in their colonization, but nigh immortality when it came to longevity. Despite this, they refused to share the mysteries to the longevity, causing the Necrontyr, some would say rightly, to have a hatred towards the Old Ones. Why should they be so well off when we have to suffer such cruel and short lives from our cancerous forms? With this sort of thought in their heads, they eventually decided to use their entire civilization to destroy the Old Ones and their spawn. The Elder describes such events as the war in heaven. Being chastised, the Necrontyr waged war on the Old Ones, and it didn't go very well. They fought hard, and they fought well. Yet the Old Ones gathered their intelligent races to do battle with the forsworn Necrontyr, and alas, there were too many. After countless years, the Necrontyr were pushed back to the Halo star systems, holding these paltry few words. Yet they fought on. Soon, all that remained was a tattered alliance of the Necrontyr, but they all held one thing in resolve: a hatred of the other sentient beings of the universe. Desperate to the extreme, salvation seemed to come to them from the stars. And it was at this particular time the Necrontyr discovered the Catan. With such a powerful energy force, they figured this could turn the war in heaven in their favor. But they needed to turn the Catan from an incorporeal form to a physical form. Using their science, the Necrontyr transferred the energy of the Catan in necrodermis, a way to take energy and bind it to metal and physical form. As the Catan became beings with actual matter, they began to revel in the worship they received from the Necrontyr, and feasted on the energies of countless mortal slaves. The Catan then gifted the Necrontyr a path of immortality and physical stability of which they craved so much for. This biotransference, which discarded the Necrontyr's diseased flesh to be replaced with living metal, gave the opportunity needed for the Catan to glut themselves on the Necrontyr's spiritual detritus and life energy, increasing their strength and leaving the Necrontyr virtually soulless. Now known as the Necrons, they became servants to the wicked Catan. With the help of their new lifeless forms and the strength of the Catan behind them, the Necrons quickly overtook the Old Ones' defenses, conquering all for the feeders of souls, the Catan. The Old Ones became desperate and formed new beings to fight their wars. Such species included the Rashan, the Krork, the Knib, and the Jokaro. They aided the Old Ones as well as the Eldar, yet to no avail. Now, as I was saying, the Old Ones formed all these races to help them against the Necrons and the Catan, but it didn't work. They were, as all things in the galaxy, consumed by a greater force and faded into nothing. Now, it must be said before we bid goodbye to the Old Ones that they mucked up the universe before their disappearance. Not by creating a monstrous species, but what all the allies they created did to the warp. Many beings, such as the Eldar, they created used psychic energy pulled from the warp. With so many beings pulling energy from the warp, along with exposing the immaterium to all their anger and rage, the warp began to twist and deform into something most foul. The fighting, pain, and destruction of the war in heaven was mirrored in the bottomless depth of the sea of souls that was the warp. The maelstrom of souls unleashed into the immaterium coalesced in the previously formless energies of the warp. Older entities that had existed within the immaterium transformed into terrifying psychic predators, tearing at the souls of vulnerable psychers as their own environment was torn apart and reforged into the realm of chaos. It wasn't long before the realm of chaos fought back, and thus the most terrifying of these new horrors were the enslavers. Warp entities whose abilities to dominate the minds of younger species and create their own portals into the material realm using mutated, possessed psychers brought them forth in ever greater numbers. For the Old Ones, this was the final disaster as the enslavers took control of their servants. The Pandora's box, unleashed by the creation of the younger species, finally scattered the last of the old ones, and broke their power over the galaxy once and for all. Life had stood at the edge of an apocalypse during the war in heaven between the old ones and the Catan. Now, as the enslavers breached the materium in epidemic proportions, the survivors looked doomed. Ultimately, beset by the implacable onset of the Catan and the calamitous warp spawn perils they themselves had mistakenly unleashed, the old ones were defeated, scattered, and finally destroyed. Now, whether the species went extinct or simply fled the galaxy to seek a new haven elsewhere is still unknown.
Actually, and ironically, many years later in 399.M41, Lord Solar Macarius actually might have found traces of the fleeing old ones. If his crusade hadn't stopped at the Halo Zone in the western edge of the Milky Way galaxy, he would have run right into the Golden Empire ruled over by the strange species known as the Zorgling.
Yes. But that is getting out of the history of the Milky Way system into a different system.
Right. Well, tell us, what did the Catan do after the old ones vanished?
Well, you see, when the Catan had the old ones on the run, they became impatient, and they began to fight amongst themselves, hunting and slaying each other for sport. Now, the Catan, you must understand, could have had an unending rule on the galaxy, yet they fell upon themselves for one simple fact. They were quite bored. Tired of how long it was taking to conquer the galaxy, they fell upon themselves. The Silent King of the Necrons, Zarek, watched this war within the ranks of the Catan silently, waiting for his opportune time to strike. Zarek seized his chance when the Old Ones were finally defeated. The Old Ones now removed from the equation, and the Catan having been spent from their hard-fought victory, it was time to revolt against their masters. Being unable to completely destroy the immortal Catan, they broke them into shards and bound them in multi-dimensional tesseract labyrinths. Despite the loss of millions, the Necrons finally regained command of their own destiny. The Necrons took pleasure in seeing the Old One's civilizations collapse as a result of their overindulgence of psychic power and the destruction of the Catan's dominion over their race. Yet even with the defeat of the Old Ones and the Catan alike, the Silent King saw that the time of the Necrons in the galaxy was over. For the moment, at least. Being so decimated by the war in heavens, the Silent King decided to put his people into deep stasis. This allowed the Necrons to rehabilitate, while the rest of the intelligent beings of the Milky Way consumed each other. Most importantly, they would outlast the Eldar, of whom had the power to actually wipe out the Necrons due to their great losses. After commanding his people to sleep for 60 million years, he broke his connection with them and sailed off into the starless void of intergalactic space. Through these millions of years, many tomb worlds and their technologies failed, via natural causes or interference from outside sources. This caused billions of Necrons to perish in their dormant states. Yet, some awoke before their time, causing them to rise from their deep slumber, from unwanted mischief of the younger races. But the time has come for them to reawaken, and in the last few hundred years, they have begun to do so. For most, after 60 million years of slumber, the revivification process has slowly brought them back amongst the living, and reaffirmed the goal of retaking their realms. It shall be noted that they, like all other empires without a singular ruler, have become divided. With no true ruler, separatist empires of the Necrons have formed throughout the galaxy. Yet, it is whispered by some that the Silent King has returned to claim
He's back!
Pardon?
He is back! He returned in 774.M41. Honestly, brother, I don't know why you are so theatrical.
Okay, fine then. Why don't you tell us what happened before the coming of man then? What happened in the next 59 million years?
Well, Zeckthar, it is said that the Eldar emerged as the new masters of the galaxy. The technological prowess of the Eldar soon eclipsed that of all other civilization of the galaxy. And they pushed the existing menaces of the time, such as the orcs, to the far fringes of the realm. The Eldar became increasingly arrogant and condescending towards other intelligent species. Their empire spread across the galaxy, eventually encompassing at least 10,000 star systems and thousands more colonized planets. Many concentrated in the region of the galaxy that would one day become the Eye of Terror. At this time, when an Eldar died, his soul peacefully became one with the war, later to be reborn once more and begin the cycle anew. The Materium had not yet become as hostile as it is now, and some of its most powerful denizens were the gods of the Eldar. Over 1 million standard years ago, the Eldar alone ruled the stars as the undisputed masters of their own destiny. Such a position was their right. Well, they thought. And the preeminence was beyond doubt. In many ways, the Eldar had good reason for such hubris, for no other sentient race of the galaxy had posed a serious threat to their wealth and stability for time immemorial after the fall of the Necrons. They were convinced that they no longer had anything to fear from the galaxy at large, and they may have been right, but the real danger came from within. The doom of the Eldar when it came took a form far more subtle and dangerous than that of alien invasion. At that point in Eldar history, nothing was beyond their reach and nothing was forbidden. The ancient race continued their glorious existence unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the dark fate that awaited them. They plied the stars at will, experiencing the wonders of the galaxy and immersing themselves completely in the endless sensations that offered them. Such was the technological mastery of the Eldar that worlds were created specifically for their pleasure, and stars lived or died at their whim. Of course, this didn't last, and they were to create not only their own downfall, but also give birth to a new Chaos God. But before we get into that, how about you tell us about the beginnings of humanity?
Well, on a backwater planet in the Sol system named Earth, a group of primates began to evolve rather rapidly some 40,000 years ago. Due to their remarkable intelligence, it only took them 15,000 years to advance technologically enough to take to the stars. This time in human history is known as the Age of Terror, or the Age of Progress. Very little is remembered from this time in human history by humans, for a couple of reasons. One, the Age of Strife, also known as Old Night, and the Ecclesiarchy, both of which we will be getting to here in a few minutes. Now, for the sake of brevity, I will mention only 3 important things that are known of this time. The first, which seems trivial but very important later on, is the first place that humanity terraformed once they took to the stars was Mars. The planet was settled by various industrial cartels, and soon the Red Planet became synonymous with technical expertise and scientific advancement, a characteristic that would mark it for many millennia to come. The second is, according to many historians in the Imperium of Man's Inquisition, the 3 oldest Chaos Gods were born in the warp during this time. The first and oldest was Khorne, the god of war, hatred, rage, wrath, blood, martial honor, strength, and murder. The second was Tzeentch, the god of change, evolution, mutation, intrigue, ambition, knowledge, sorcery, destiny, lies, and trickery. The third was Grandfather Nurgle, the god of plague, disease, decay, despair, destruction, death, and rebirth. All of these gods are said to have been born during the Dark Ages, sometime after the fall of the ancient Roman Empire and the birth of the British. This is highly illogical, though, and all 3 of these gods were birthed during the time I already discussed, the war in heaven, during the plague of the enslavers.
Makes much more sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it is documented by the Eldar during this time as well. But why do the humans think that they were born this late into the Milky Way system? And more importantly, the warp?
Well, I think it's because of a couple of reasons. First off, humans have always liked to think of themselves at the center of the universe, even though it's just simply not true.
They are rather egotistical. What's the second reason?
Simply put, Of all the species in the universe, nothing gives off the energy and the warp that the human soul does. Perhaps during this time of death and misery was the first time the Chaos Gods had turned their gaze towards humanity and began to toy with them. But whatever the reason, it matters not. What does matter is that this time in history there are 4 Chaos Gods living in the warp.
Brother, in no lore has Slaanesh been birthed yet.
Right you are, brother. And she who thirsts is not who I speak of. I speak of course, the god Malice, the true god of chaos.
I figured we wouldn't even have to bring him up. He has such a small imprint on the galaxy.
Fair enough. Okay, for those of you listening, just know that there was a 4th god of chaos at this time, known as Malice, also known as the Hierarch of Anarchy and Terror, the Outcast God, the Lost God, or the Renegade God. Now, the 3rd thing you need to know was at some point, most say around the 8th millennium BC, the Emperor of Mankind was born somewhere within the then country of Turkey. He will be very important to our story, but not for some 14,000 years. By the end of the Age of Terra was when advanced nuclear fusion and antimatter propulsion technology was developed that eventually allowed humanity to construct interstellar starships that could colonize other star systems. Though the slow travel times of these vessels meant these human colonies had to be self-sufficient to survive, as no aid could arrive from Earth in time. This next age was known as the Age of Technology, where humanity began to colonize the stars using these sublight spacecraft. At first, only nearby star systems could be reached, and the human colonies established on them were required to survive as independent states, since they were separated from old Earth by up to 10 human generations time travel. Now, I must say, this is one of my favorite times in human history, Yuksen. Humanity during this time was very inquisitive in nature, and took the stars as explorers, sweeping across the galaxy. Their curiosity took them to new wonders and technology as well, and many wonderful and terrifying things were made during this time. This golden age lasted for 10,000 years, and during this time, a couple of things happened that should be noted. The first is that due to the harshness of some planets, humans on said planets began to evolve and adapt to survive. This is where you get the first recordings of ab-humans, such as the massive ogrins, the small and rather pudgy ratlings, and most importantly, the mining squats, who became short yet stocky in nature. While the ab-humans known as the squats would die out slowly during the age of the Imperium of Man, and before you say anything, Yuksen, I have to add that they have not completely died out, but there are very few of them left. A large group of them, though, during this time, took massive ships and sailed to the galactic core, to mine the great riches of the area. Due to the hostility of the core, they took cloning pods with them to continue their work, along with the schematics to make the men of iron, more about them in a bit, that they would begin to call Ironkin. They themselves still thrive there to this very day, although they are no longer called squats, and are known to most of the Imperium as a xenospecies known as the Votan, who call themselves the Kin. Yet, speaking of the men of iron, during the time of the Age of Technology, the men of iron were a commonplace in humanity. No longer did humans fight their own wars. Instead, they relied on the men in iron, robots with highly advanced AI systems to run them. This went well until, for some unknown reason, the men in iron revolted, sometime around the 23rd millennium. Eventually, after much bloodshed, the cybernetic revolt, as it was known, was put down, but just as humanity was getting back on its feet, disaster struck in the 25th millennium. This time was short but deadly, known as the Age of Strife, or Old Night. Warp storms began to arise, cutting communication off from whole galaxies. Psychers began to manifest in humans all over, and with that, demons from the warp began to corrupt humanity. The warp rippled and shook, and soon just about every world humanity had conquered or discovered became cut off from Terra. Some stood solid against the dark horrors of chaos. Others fell into madness. Xenos warbands and armies took advantage of humanity's struggles and began to circle, feasting on the wounded worlds with mad eagerness. It wasn't until the 29th millennium that a man arose from Terra with the thought of putting humans back on top through a united cause of conquest. That man was the Emperor of Mankind, and he began his crusade of the stars with the unification of Terra. It was during this time that he created the Adeptus Custodes, the Primarchs, and the famous Adeptus Astartes, also known as the Space Marines. Now, by the 30th millennium, the Emperor had conquered Terra and was ready to take to the stars. But while the Emperor dreamed of galactic conquest, the Eldar, the biggest kids on the block, were beginning to falter.
Quite right, Zeckthar. The catalyst that brought about the Eldar's fall came from their innate need to fuel their passions and indulge in every extreme. With fantastically sophisticated machines that took care of all the labor and manufacturing required to keep an advanced society functioning, they were left to indulge in other, more aesthetic pursuits. Over time, the Eldar became indolent and decadent. Fueled by an inexhaustible curiosity, many gave way to their most hedonistic impulses. Exotic cults sprang up across the Eldar domains that eclipsed the noble pursuits of old, each dedicated to esoteric knowledge and sensual excess. The core of the Eldar race began to look inwards, inexorably seeking new ways to explore the full range of emotion and sensation. With no need to perform substantial work or labor, the Eldar began to pursue their curiosities and desires with all the dedication that only their species could muster. This descent into decadence spanned many Terran millennia. Such behavior was, in the end, corrosive to the soul of the race. The pursuit of excess gradually became a blight upon the whole society. In the parallel dimension of the immaterium, the wall, the reflections of these intense experiences began to coalesce as the shifting tides of the chaotic Empyrean can take form around the raw emotions emitted by the sentient beings of the material universe and attract even more of such similar psychic energies to themselves. The constant stream of individual selfishness and indulgence pouring into the warp from the Eldar Empire slowly and silently nourished and empowered that which lay within, a nascent god of pleasure and pain, content to wait and to grow.
No, pardon me, Yuksen, real quick. But for those of you, anyways, who are just getting into Warhammer 40k, the warp has a boatload of names. I kind of mentioned at the very beginning, but some of the more common ones that I just wanted to make mention of is like for instance, Yuksen just said the Immaterium and the Empyrean, also the Realm of Chaos. All these things, anyways, are just other names for the warp. Yeah. So if we lost you there, sorry about that. But the Empyrean is also the warp. Yeah. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Sorry, Yuksen. Carry on.
The heartfelt sorrow of those left who mourned the loss of innocence eventually turned to bitterness and spite. In time, brother fought brother, and sadistic killers stalked the shadows in search of victims for their vile lusts. No life was spared in the pursuit of pleasures both murderous and perverse. A sickness of vice overtook the Eldar race, and blood flowed through the streets amidst the bestial roar of the crowd. Their hidden realms within the webways, such as Kamarach, became sprawling palaces of avarice and sadism. The entire worlds were bent to the pursuit of the darkest of sensations. As the society collapsed in civilization-wide insanity, these Eldar recoiled in horror from what they were becoming. Realizing that they stood upon the brink of destruction, they bent their considerable resources to the construction of the massive craft worlds. The graceful spaceborne cities that were the size of small moons. The Eldar of the craft worlds retreated into asceticism and spiritual introspection, preserving what they could of their ancient ways and culture before the time of the pleasure cults. They left the core worlds of the Eldar Empire behind for the dubious safety of deep space, to the laughter and contempt of those who remained behind. Some even managed to flee far enough to escape the terrible destruction of the coming fall and the birth of Slaanesh.
Yuksen, when did this actually take place?
Well, the Imperium can't seem to decide when specifically, just as probably sometime during the Age of Strife.
But Yuksen, that's roughly began, like I said, in the 25th millennium and ended in the 30th. That's quite the spread.
Well, the Eldari have it down to as being around the 30th to 32nd millennium, which also has its own issues timeline-wise.
You mean like the Horus Heresy being in the 30th millennium?
Right. After all, the Eye of Terra was the byproduct of Slanesh's birth.
But, okay, when was it specifically? I mean, surely we have documented the time that it took place, right?
Yes, according to our calendar, which is actually accurate, it took place in 142.453.27.69 ZO. But let's face it, Zeckthar, our listeners could begin to understand our tri-Sklandic slider calendar. So, there's no point in even trying to explain it.
Right you are, Yuksen. But so you fine folks are not left in too much of the dark. I'll just go ahead and say that the Eldari are closer in their loggings than humanity.
Indeed, but getting back to our sad tale, when Slanesh finally burst into divine consciousness, there is not one Eldar alive who did not feel its claws in his or her soul. With a howl of raw power, Slanesh roared into supernatural life. The psychic scream of Slanesh's birth tore the souls from all the Eldar within 1,000 light years of it, sparing only those sheltered in the wraithbone holes of the craft worlds. Countless billions of Eldar screamed aloud and fell dead. In a heartbeat, the shining Eldar civilization that lasted for eons had its heart ripped out, leaving a pulsing afterbirth of pure chaos in its place. The spirits of the Eldar were drawn from within them and consumed as their blasphemous creation took its first infernal breath. Intoxicated with this draught, Slanesh laughed and looked upon a universe ripe for the taking. Since then, the Eldar have been a shadow of their past and are no longer called the Eldar, since they have split into multiple different factions. First and most numerous of these is the Eldari, who travel the stars in the craft worlds. Then you have the Exodites, who have reverted to more primitive ways.
Ah, yes. They're the ones that ride the dinosaurs.
Indeed. And then you have my favorite, the mischievous Harlequins, who follow one of the few Eldar gods that didn't die with the birth of Slanesh, and his name is Kegarak. Then you have smaller factions of Corsairs and Rangers. Now, brother, why don't we get back to what mankind was up to during the fall of the Eldar?
Certainly, Yuksen. Right after you list the last Eldar nation.
There isn't any more, well, none of which are worth talking about anyways.
Really? We're gonna
Yes.
go there? Fine. What my brother is trying to evade speaking about here is the Drukhari, who live within the Eternal City within the webway known as Kamarach. They are a vile offshoot of the Eldar who, instead of learning from the mistakes, went full tilt into their hedonistic ways. They are slavers and pillagers, whose only joy in life is stabbing someone in the back,
Figuratively as well as literally.
and torturing any poor soul who is captured by them.
Yes, and mark my word, there is no viler species in existence in the Milky Way. Well, maybe the sloth, but
That's a good point, but we're not going to talk about them.
we're not talking about the maggot men, right?
But getting back to humanity. At the beginning of the 30th millennium, the Emperor of Mankind was ready to take to the stars. Starting in 798.M30, the Emperor began his Great Crusade, along the way picking up his sons, the 21 Primarchs, who were cast out into the galaxy by the gods of chaos. Now, this might sound confusing, and we will clear this up when we go a little more into detail on the Imperium in a couple of weeks. But for now, just know that his sons, when discovered, were all given legions of Space Marines, specifically designed for their skills. The first Primarch found was Horus Lupercal, and of all the Primarchs, he was on the best terms with the Emperor. In Horus, the Emperor saw chip off the old block, and after finding the 21st Primarch, the Emperor gave over control of the Crusade to Horus in 0.M31 after the Ulanor triumph. Then, thinking that his boy Horus had everything under control, the Emperor returned to Terra to work on his Webway project. You see, the Emperor had discovered the Webway and wanted to make use of it, so he began to design something called the Golden Throne, a place where a powerful psyker could sit and guide humanity through the Webways. Unfortunately, Horus was corrupted by the Chaos Gods and started a civil war against his father in 4.M31. This civil war became the bloodiest time in human history, and if you want to know more about it, I suggest you listen to our voxes on the subject. They're all under our podcast, The Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka. To make a long story short, the Emperor ended up killing Horus, but is mortally wounded. He instructs his followers to place him on the Golden Throne, so that he may continue to protect mankind. Yet now his flesh has all but rotted away, and only his mind hangs on by a thread. 1,000 psychers are murdered each day to keep him and the Golden Throne going, allowing the Emperor to keep the warp at bay. Yet his mind is starting to fail, and it won't be long before he is simply snuffed out.
Yes, but that is now, in the 42nd millennium. But getting back to after the Horus Heresy, the next age of humanity is known as the Time of Rebirth. During this era, the Imperium slowly recovered from the Horus Heresy, economically, politically, and even technologically. It started with a myriad of wars known as the Great Scouring, where after a lengthy campaign, the Imperium's forces hunted down and banished the remaining traitor legions from their strongholds in human-settled space. Eventually, the Chaos Space Marines and Ruinous Powers' other followers among the forces of Chaos found refuge in the massive warp rift known as the Eye of Terror. For a time, the Imperium knew peace from the corrupted followers of the Chaos Gods. At the same time, many alien species that had been fought and defeated during the Great Crusade reappeared in human space to take advantage of the disruptions caused by the Horus Heresy and plagued the vulnerable worlds of mankind. Of course, there are two notable events that occurred during these supposedly peaceful times. First was the First Black Crusade. The First Black Crusade of Ezekiel Abaddon, more about him later, began with the First Battle of Cadia in 781.M31, which signaled not only the beginning of the Black Crusades, but also the opening salvos of the Traitor Legion's long war against the Imperium of Man. After the First Battle of Cadia was won, the forces of Chaos plunged the Segmentum Obscurus into a decades-long war, at the end of which Abaddon the Despoiler claimed the demon sword Dracnian. The other notable event was the War of the Beast, taking place between 544 to 546.M32. My brother and I did a couple of voxes on this war, in fact, but here's a brief description. The orcs rampaged across the Imperium on a massive scale in 544.M32 during what was known as the War of the Beast. The number of green skin attacks grew until it became the greatest orc invasion that the galaxy had ever known to that time, eclipsing even the orc war defeated by the Emperor and Horus during the Ulanor Crusade, which had earned Horus the title of Woolmaster. Nothing was safe from the orcs' primal desire to conquer the galaxy and their widespread advances, including several assaults on Terra itself, which were only halted when the Imperium resorted to the use of the most extreme measures at great cost to the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. So, after the Time of Rebirth, we have the Forging. The Forging, also sometimes called the Golden Age of the Imperium, is an era that began roughly in the middle of the 32nd millennium and lasted until the start of the 35th. It represented a time of further consolidation and expansion of the Imperium beyond the borders originally created during the Great Crusade. The imperial state church, the Adeptus Ministorum, became firmly established during the time of rebirth, gained further political power as the imperial creed became a dominant facet of imperial culture on most human settled worlds. Overall, the forging represented the zenith of imperial civilization in the post-heresy age, culturally, politically, and technologically. Following this, we have one of Zeckthar's favorite time periods, the Age of Apostasy.
Pardon me, Yuksen, but before we get to the Age of Apostasy, we must mention the Tau.
Must you?
I should say so. Now, the Tau began to evolve as a species on the planet Tau sometime around 255.863.44.69 CL.
Which, just like last time, it is too complicated for your teeny tiny minds.
Yes, well, for you folks listening, they were discovered by the Inquisition of the Imperium of Man in the 35th millennium. All you really need to know is, much like humanity, the Tau began their galactic struggles as warring tribes until the Ethereals showed up. Now, the Ethereals are the leaders of the Tau, and we will discuss them when we talk about the Tau during our Xenos Vox next week. But what you need to know now is that they set up a caste system of government that has been very fruitful for them as a species. It wasn't long before they began to advance so much that they took to the stars. And instead of slaughtering all the aliens they met, they tried diplomacy first. It wasn't long before many races joined their burgeoning empire, such as the Kroot and the Vespins. Along with this, they began pushing their creed known as the Greater Good. The Greater Good. Things went well until, well, they ran into humanity on the eastern fringes of the Ultima Segmentum. Due to the Tau's nature, they first tried diplomacy and learned that while for the last 5,000 years they thought they were a pretty big fish in a small pond, they were in fact a minnow in a large ocean. And the Imperium of Man? Well, it was Jaws. Upon learning this, they knew that open conflict would end in destruction to their little empire, so diplomacy was the way to go. For a time, the two empires lived in a very uneasy peace, mainly because the ecclesiarchy didn't really know about the Tau. But all that changed during the Damocles Crusade in the 41st millennium that ended in a stalemate, mainly because of a couple of factors. The first, the Tau's advanced technology, and the second, the Imperium being pulled away for more important matters, such as the 13th Black Crusade and the Tyrannic Wars, which we will be going into later. Just know that the Tau are interesting due to their advancements in technology and their weird way of thinking. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Why don't you tell us, Yuksen, about the Age of Apostasy, as well as the destructive force known as the ecclesiarchy?
Well, the Age of Apostasy was the second period of interstellar civil war that consumed the Imperium of Man in the early 36th millennium. The terrible conflicts of the Age of Apostasy grew in part out of a long-running political struggle between the Administratum and the Adeptus Ministorum for dominance over the Imperium's governance. The struggle began when control over the Imperium's government was essentially seized by a single man, the High Lord of Terra, Gosh Van Dia, who commanded both the Administratum and the Ecclesiarchy as master of the Administratum and Ecclesiarch, and ruled the Imperium according to his own wishes instead of in accordance with the Emperor's will. High Lord Van Dier was in power for almost a standard century before finally being overthrown in the midst of the Terran Crusade and slain by his own bodyguards, the daughters of the Emperor, who later became the Adeptus Sororitas. Van Dier was replaced as the Imperial Ecclesiarch by Sebastian Dole, who unleashed the Imperium's second major era of reform following the Horus Heresy. The end of the Age of Apostasy resulted in a major reformation of the Ecclesiarchy, the creation of the Inquisition's Ordo Hereticus to police those enemies of the Emperor who lay within the Imperium's own structures, and the creation of the Adeptus Sororitas to serve as both the Ecclesiarch's new military force and the chamber militant of the Ordo Hereticus. Despite this, the Imperium seemed to fall even faster into decay than anything else, because this is when pretty much all advancement in any field stopped, slowed to crawl, or even went backwards in progression.
This was because of the ecclesiarchy, quite frankly.
Yeah. But
So, I mean,
anyway,
that is the reason why. But
Zeckthar has also done a few voxes on this subject, I believe.
it is one of my favorite times in Imperial history. But
Because of how messed up it was. Yeah.
it was very messed up. There were a lot of idiots running around in charge.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting. Eventually, people, anyways, they got bored of it. They were just like, "Fine, we're gonna fix this." but moving on. What's the next age?
Following the Age of Apostasy was the Age of Redemption. The Age of Redemption began roughly in 010.M37 and ended in 112.M38. The Age of Redemption followed the civil conflicts of the Age of Apostasy in the 36th millennium and was marked by a tremendous surge in religious fervor among the peoples of the Imperium of Man.
And a complete failure in technology advancement. Sorry.
As I just mentioned prior.
Yep.
It's like, no, they found a new sprinkler system. No. It's like, no, they dug that up somewhere else.
Yes, the old STL that showed how sprinklers work. I see it now.
This was expressed in the form of a new willingness to launch countless imperial crusades and other conflicts against those deemed to be the enemies of the God Emperor. The Age of Redemption came to an end early in the 38th millennium as the power of the Imperium began to weaken under increasing assault from Chaos and Xenos enemies. This marked the start of the long period of slow decline and stagnation known as the Waning. Now, the Waning was a relatively undefined era of the Age of the Imperium that lasted from early 38th millennium until 744.M41. It was characterized by, at least the Imperial historians, the slow degradation of the Imperium's stability, power, and peace as new Chaos and Xenos threats assaulted the Emperor's worlds. As we have constantly pointed out, this actually started way before this age.
Yes, like we just said anyways. It started actually at the end of the Age of Apostasy. But I think it's like people were starting to notice it.
Yeah.
At this point, like, wait a minute. Things aren't as swimming as they used to be. But
with the Imperium's military forces in every branch utterly exhausted by the continuous Imperial crusades of the prior Age of Redemption, star system after star system fell to orc invasion, chaos insurgence, Xenos infestation, or sheer rebellion. It came to an end with the start of the greatest period of turmoil and strife in the Imperial history since the Horus Heresy, known as the Time of Ending. Now, the Time of Ending is the period of time when everything falls apart, and when the dreaded 13th Crusade occurs. But before we get to that crusade, how about you tell us about the Tyrannic Wars?
okay. Well, before we get into the 13th Black Crusade, which is probably the most important part of humanity's history since the Horus Heresy, we have to discuss the Tyrannic Wars.
Indeed.
Now, pardon me, but back when I was talking about the Horus Heresy, I forgot to mention something very key. Now, during that time, a device that was activated called the Pharos, which acted like a beacon and spanned across time and space, echoing out of the Milky Way system. And unfortunately, something very terrifying was listening. The Tyranids are an extragalactic species of hideous insectoid Xenos. They actually comprise an entire spacefaring ecosystem comprised of innumerable different bioforms, which are all variations on the same genetic theme. They live simply to feed on biomass, and when they arrive on a planet, like a swarm of locusts, they eat everything until the world is simply a lifeless rock, and then they move on to do it again. They float through space in hive fleets, all controlled by the hive mind, and what she says goes. They feed on a planet, absorb all the biomass, grow stronger, and then move on. If they have any other purpose, humanity hasn't found it yet. It is argued when the first of these horrifying Xenos showed up in the Milky Way. But what we do know is that they showed up in terrifying force in the eastern fringes of the Ultima Segmentum in 745.M41. The massive fleet was dubbed Behemoth, and after the Battle of Macrogh, the Xenos were barely defeated by the Ultramarines chapter of the Space Marines. Yet instead of being utterly destroyed, parts of it splintered and still harass the Imperium to this very day. Thinking that this was a one-time occurrence, humanity moved on, but in 993.M41, Hive Fleet Kraken entered Imperial space, but it had learned from Hive Fleet Behemoth. You see, like I said, all the Tyranids are connected to the Hive Mind, so every time they lose or fail on an objective, the Hive Mind learns from the defeat and changes tactics with alarming speed. Instead of assaulting its targets as a single-massed Hive Fleet like Behemoth, Kraken split into countless smaller fleets, each enveloping whole star systems before reinforcements could arrive. Though the backbone of the Hive Fleet was broken by its defeat at the Battle of Ikaful, and the Eldari craft world Ayenden, the cost to the Imperium was still great, and many splinter fleets broke off from Kraken to later wreak havoc deep within Imperial space, even reaching as far as the fringes of the Tau Empire. Then, only a scant 4 years later, in 997.M41, Hive Fleet Leviathan unexpectedly appeared and attacked from 2 points, cutting off large portions of the galaxy from reinforcements. Just as it seemed the defenses of the Segmentum Solar, perhaps Terra itself, would be tested, the Tyranids were distracted by being deflected into the star system of the powerful Orc Empire of Octarius in the Octarius sector of the Segmentum Ultima. While the Orcs managed to stall the main Tyranids' Hive Fleet's advance in what was become known as the Octarian War, tendrils of the Leviathan have already begun to reemerge from these battles, victorious and stronger than ever, after having absorbed potent Orcic genetic material into their own genetic pool. These monsters haunt the Imperium to this very day, and some might dare say are far more of a concern to mankind than even chaos. But I think that changed when the Great Rift appeared at the end of the Black Crusade. Hey, Yuksen?
Indeed, Zeckthar. Well, getting back to Abaddon and his 13th Black Crusade, he was finally ready to strike hard against the Imperium of Man. Now, some may be wondering, why did it take Abaddon 13 Crusades to finally strike hard at the Imperium? Of course, some of you may also be wondering, who is this Abaddon fellow? Well, Abaddon is the last member of Horus's top advisors / commandos, and is basically the new champion of the Chaos Gods. As for why so many Crusades, that's because he would appear from the warp, grab essential items to further his plans, and then withdraw before sufficient forces were able to address his crusades in full. To Abaddon, it hasn't been 13 crusades, but more of a single long campaign. In fact, he refers to the crusades as the Long War, which we will be talking about in more depth in a couple weeks. But for those of you who want to know more about the crusades, Zeckthar did do some voxes on them as well.
Indeed, but we both did a vox on Cadia, which we called Cadia Stands.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the 13th Black Crusade is when he had all of his ducks lined up in a row and struck hard and fast against the Imperium. His target, the fortress world of Cadia. Now, for some, this may not seem as a big deal since many planets have been destroyed over time. Well, Cadia was different from other planets, or more specifically, was on Cadia is what made it a big deal. Sunk into Cadia were Necron pylons, which actually hinder the flow of the warp into reality. So by destroying the world, the pylons were no longer in place, causing what is known as the Great Rift. Great Rift is a tear in reality and a raging galaxy-wide series of warp storms that has essentially rent the territory of the Imperium Man in half.
Now, while all hope seems lost, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. While chaos, orcs, and Tyranids swarm across the Imperium, which has been cut in two, heroes of old have awakened to help mankind soldier on. The Primarch of the Ultramarines, Rabute Gilliman, has been revived, and he now rules the Imperium of Man, at least south of the Great Rift. In the north, the Lion, Primarch of the Dark Angels, has awoken from his slumber and is gathering an army of forgotten warriors to strike back hard against chaos. Belisarius Cawl, Yuksen's favorite character, and Archmagos, and the Adeptus Mechanicus, who helped reawaken Gilliman, has also improved on the Emperor's genetic creation of the Space Marine, and now hundreds of thousands of Primaris Space Marines are reinforcing the old lines. Gilliman has begun a crusade that eclipses all others, known as the Indomitus Crusade. Not since the Macarian Crusade, or the Great Crusade before that, has such a massive crusade been formed to take back what humanity views as rightfully theirs, the Milky Way. But every step of the way, they are thwarted. The fallen Primarch Demon Princes gather their forces in the warp. Gazgul Urak Urthraka gathers the largest Urg since the War of the Beast, and who knows where his army is going.
True. Orcs are very unpredictable things.
Indeed, and like you mentioned, probably the most dangerous yet hidden thing to humanity, is Zarek is starting to wake up the Necrons and bring them to his banner. I will say, if he completes this, then there will be no hope for humanity. All the while, High Fleet Leviathan still floats through the inky blackness of space, consuming all it comes across. And this is where we leave you because, well, we're all caught up. But before we go, is there anything you would like to discuss, Yuksen?
Most of the things that I bring up will be popping up in the next couple weeks, so like the whole Primarchs thing.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So we did brush by the Primarchs. Don't worry, guys, we will talk about the Primarchs. We were just trying to make sure, anyways, that everybody kind of understands how the timeline runs from the very beginning to the 42nd millennium. But before we go, what is your favorite time to do research into, Yuksen?
Probably the 41st, 42nd millennium.
The time of ending?
Yeah. But also around the time of when the Space Marine chapters were more split up, which was during the time of rebirth.
Oh, so like the Great Scouring, when they actually started making secondary foundings and whatnot?
Yeah.
Which we also didn't talk about. But we will. But like I said, this was all just basically on a time. We were talking about a timeline. Me personally, anyways, the Age of Apostasy is always interesting because it's just, especially because it's the concept, anyways, of the church taking over the state and then them taking back control and no one thinking maybe we should keep these separate or kick the ecclesiarchy to the curb. It was just kind of a, oh, naughty you. And they just didn't take long for them to kind of do exactly the same thing. They put in measures so that one person couldn't control the whole place until, Gilman did. But he did it differently. But yeah, to me anyways, and just anyways, the fall of mankind after that, just being thwarted every single step of like new technology advancements, we don't do that anymore. Because it leads to heresy. Just that whole aspect. The Horus Heresy in of itself, I know we just kind of briefly went over it, but there is a lot of information in there. It's probably one of the more documented aspects of humanity. The scrolls on the Horus Heresy itself, anyways, were recorded within the Black Library. I think there's, 60 of them?
Yeah.
Written by all sorts of different authors at the time. Not only that, but these books are also kept in, well, we have some. But they're also kept in, I can't remember what the library is called on Terra, but it's also a massive library. But the thing, though, that intrigues me anyways, that it's harder to find stuff on, is the age of technology. To me anyways, that is probably like the best time of humanity because it's honestly humanity at its finest. It's trying to strive forward. There's this curiosity, and their technology goes in leaps and bounds. And if it hadn't been for like the warp storms and being cut off and separated from each other, and quite frankly, the Emperor, they might have kept just rolling, and it would have been interesting to see where they would have gone from there.
would have also been nice to also have attached to that, because the more of that information would come out, the more they would expand on the abhumans probably. What happened during, because that's when the abhumans started actually coming into being, because of the fact this was around the time that they also started expanding out into other areas.
But like I said, anyways, one of the reasons why we don't have as much information, this is why I like this period in time, because I get to go on expeditions and try to find, anyways, more information about this. Unfortunately, we were on vacation during this time, so we weren't there to record anything. But it lets me get out of the house and kind of do things. But it's during that time is because of Old Night after that. It's very much, anyways, like a lot of stuff that ended up going missing about, like, for instance, the Roman Empire during on Terran 42 is because of the Dark Ages right after that. We've thankfully, anyways, we've kept quite a bit of information on it, but there's stuff that we just simply don't know because it just ended up being just like Rome got sacked by the Vandals, I think. It's the name of the Vandals. Or the Visigoths. That's who I'm actually probably thinking of. But in Constantinople was sacked too, which means that lots of stuff, anyways, just were lost. So that's the problem, anyways, of the age of technology. And they're still finding stuff today, anyways. Belisarius Call has found many a STL, or whatever the hell that acronym means. But it's all stuff, anyways, that was designed during the age of technology that they're still finding the Mechanicus is, and they're like, oh, this will work.
That's the only way that they can really do anything now without being claimed to be heretics. And
right. That's the only... Ironically, that is the only advancements that you will see in technology, which is kind of funny because it's not really an advancement in technology. It's just something that humanity lost a long time ago.
Rediscovery.
And rediscovered it. It's like if we rediscovered, rubber on Terran 40, if they rediscovered rubber on Terran 42, or something along those lines, or how to use a tire. I mean,
the wheel,
Everybody switched to hovercrafts, and then all of a sudden, anyways, that collapsed. And so the only thing we could figure out, anyways, was, I don't know, treads or something like that. And then all of a sudden, someone found like an old Goodyear manual and showed, anyways, how to make a tire. That's kind of what an STL is. And on that note, we are out of time for today. Now, like I said, join us next week as we delve a little more into the xenospecies, such as the Tau, Eldar, Voton, the Necrons, Tyranids, and of course, your favorite Yuksen, the Orcs.
Fantastic! But for those of you who enjoyed our little show, could you please be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button? If you wish to help us expand our work on 40k lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka. Right now we have 4, but we could use more.
Hey, that rhymes!
Oh, and don't forget to purchase the Jotunise. Sold wherever ebooks are sold. I believe you actually have them in paperback now, yes?
Yes, but I'm planning on actually setting something up so that I'm still working on the bugs on that. If you really want it in paperback, you can find it on paperback. Let's put it that way. But I've got some things, anyways, in the workings right now, so it might be beneficial to wait a week or two if you want to get it in paperback.
All right.
Like you could get it cheaper or signed. But okay. Anyways, we just got to get going. You guys have a great day, and until next time, this is Zeckthar
and Yuksen
signing off.